Welcome to Community Chats, bringing you stories and insights from the heart of Community Living Toronto, a non-profit organization that proudly supports people with intellectual disabilities and their families. We will focus on stories of belonging and inclusion and topics of interest from communities across Ontario and the world. From uplifting moments to breaking barriers, from innovative policies to ideas from leading thinkers, we continue to advocate for inclusive communities and support the rights and choices of people with an intellectual disability.
Hello, everyone. This is Brad Saunders, CEO of Community Living Toronto, and welcome to our Community Chats podcast. These podcasts are our opportunity to share, learn, and understand each other better. We release a new one on the 15th and the 30th of each month, so please listen, like, and give us your feedback. Community Chats is one of the ways we stay connected, and we really do value your feedback. Michael Braithwaite is an innovator. As CEO of Blue Door, he has grown the organization to address the needs of people who are homeless and in need of better and adequate housing. He's created a dynamic social enterprise that addresses employment, skills training, as well as the financial needs of individuals that they're involved with. In our conversation, we cover a variety of topics, and he gives great insight into the significant challenges we are facing in housing, in homelessness, mental health and addictions, and how we as individuals can help each other, among other things. I now bring you Michael Braithwaite. All right, Michael, thank you for joining us today. I'm really pleased that you've taken some time out of your schedule to talk about one of the more challenging and increasingly pervasive present issues that we're facing, not only in Ontario and in our larger cities, but across the whole province and really indeed around the world. Homelessness, homes, and the affordability of homes has become an issue, and we're certainly seeing the downstream effects of that on people that are living quite vulnerably, sleeping rough, and having challenging times. So, really looking forward to a good conversation. Michael, as I said, is the CEO at Blue Door. Do a tremendous amount of great work outside of the city of Toronto in a number of different areas. But I'm going to start off by, Michael, just asking you maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this work, and then a little bit about Blue Door.
Thanks so much, Brad. Thanks for having me on. And I love to talk about this because I think the more aware people are, the more likely they are to take action. So I've been in the housing and homelessness sector for about 14 years now. It started in 2010. Before that, many years with the YMCA, always in social services end of things. I think I was about 11. I always say I was voluntold by my mother. I was going to sit around all summer, and I was going to volunteer at the YMCA, and I thought she was crazy. Like, why would anyone do anything for free? The best thing she's ever done for me, right? I ended up spending years there, learned a lot, wonderful place. My last stop was in Hamilton downtown, very tough area, still is. Lots of people experiencing homelessness, and we had a men's residence, and it was kind of odd. It was never meant to be what it became. So it was independent living, but the cheapest independent living in Hamilton, so people could afford it. With Ontario Works, ODSP, it was always full, 174 dudes living together. Never a good idea in any circumstance. But this was without any services, right? It was just independent living. So a lot of people, unfortunately, with addiction and mental health challenges and no services attached. So you can imagine probably many with brain injuries, developmental disabilities that weren't getting supports. So it was messy. So I saw that. And when the opportunity, I just, to actually be a part of a solution to something like homelessness and to help with that came around. And my wife is still in the sector, had been before me, said, this is something I think you could be really passionate about. And been very fortunate to do that at 360 Kids, Raising the Roof, and now Blue Door for the past 5 years or so.
Great. So Blue Door, you're located in New York region and beyond. Tell us a little bit about the organization.
Yeah, so Blue Door's been around for 42 years. Primarily started as just emergency housing or emergency shelters, people know it as, and it does much, much more now. We primarily were in New York for many, many years, and now are in Durham doing some housing and our social enterprise, our construction social enterprise in Durham, and as well our social enterprise in partnership with Humber College. We do that in Peel. And so partially because too, I mean, we set these like imaginary boundaries thinking that, this person will never cross there to get, and people go where the services are, right? So often they'll go into Toronto or Peel or Durham or we'll work together. So we really work and we work with partners to address those needs.
There was I live in Halton, and the joke in Halton was always or not just Halton but other cities outside of Toronto, we would address the homelessness issue when we came across it by buying people a bus ticket to Toronto, but that seems to have changed in the last number of years. So homelessness um, has changed a lot over the decades, and we certainly seem to be experiencing a crisis right now across the country. Can you talk about the state of homelessness right now, how you see it and what you're seeing on the ground?
Yeah, for sure, Brad. I think so. If you look back, um, to when homelessness has always been around in some shape or form, but never to this extent. And it really, started with bad policy changes in the early 90s, the late 80s, conservative liberal governments, where they downloaded that to the provincial or municipal levels, and they got out of the housing game, social housing. So we were building thousands of units of social housing. We no longer were doing that. And you just see the numbers just start to skyrocket, right? And then, of course, add into that the drug crisis, wages not keeping up with the cost of living, cost of housing skyrocketing, right? So you have this kind of tsunami that has put us to where we are now, where, in Toronto, you have 10,000 shelter beds that are full every night. In York region, everything's full. We're guessing around a couple thousand people. Now, a little different too. So in York region, when you talk about homelessness and when you say, what does homelessness look like? Now, if you ask an adult crowd, usually they'll be like, oh, I don't want to say the wrong thing, right?
Yeah.
But I'll ask that to kids who have no filter, and they'll be like, oh, they're, dirty clothes or their long beard. And it's funny, I mean, because I've had the beard and older, so it's half the time they're describing me, right? Like but what they're describing is what they see maybe on a trip into Toronto, right? Where homelessness really doesn't have that look because, it's a person. And so in York region, as I would guess what you were talking about in many rural areas, we believe it doesn't exist because we don't see it, right? It's not right in our face. It's not in the downtown core only.
Right.
I mean, you look at York, at Durham, they're massive geographic areas. So it's so spread out, right? And hidden, but it's definitely there. And now we see that where, there's extreme street homelessness where mental health and addictions and other pieces play a part. Right now, too, we see people that simply can't afford it. And you see that in your day to day that you might be receiving disability support that comes nowhere near the cost of a one bedroom apartment of over $2,000 a month, right? So all these things contributing. We're 30 years behind the social housing game. Yes, the federal government released, a housing strategy, which is awesome. In 2017, we had 30 years to catch up on, right? And the goal from CMHC was to build. I think we needed like 5 million new homes, and that's not even affordable. That's 5 million new homes
Yeah.
by 2030, and we're far from that.
Well, just the lag time. Like we're involved in a large housing project and have several sort of ongoing at any given time. The amount of time lead time it takes to get housing off the ground, it's 8 to 10 years before you're into a place from the idea stage. Even if you own land, it can take quite a bit of time. So, to your point, it's not something that we're going to be able to address quickly.
No, and nonprofits, like bravo to you and community living for actually seeing like this isn't someone else's problem or government's going to solve our problems, right? Like you and the team who've done extraordinarily innovative work because it's needed. You're like you actually took that, if it's going to be, it's up to me, to heart, and you have to. And I think more nonprofits need to do that where we're very risk adverse or we could point fingers, but we need to step up and actually do it. You're right. And it's a time crunch, right? If it takes that long, let's do it now. But nonprofits are sitting on a lot of land that we own. I mean, now, in their defense, and we've just been through this, it's extremely hard to do because you're
Yeah.
looking at rezo so usually to qualify for funding, you may have to spend $1 million. And then there's
Yeah.
no guarantee that won't be wasted because you can't raise the dollars, right? So we're a nonprofit to say to their board, we need $1 million on what we think is a good idea. I mean, that's a pretty big leap of faith. And a board's job is to manage risk. You're asking them to take a pretty big leap. So many don't do it. So I think what has to happen is really we have to make it, and we'll see groups like the United Way now helping with that upfront developmental looking at things, making it a little more feasible and less risky for nonprofits like yours and mine to step up to actually be a bigger part of the solution.
Yeah, it's great to see that ecosystem developing out. And for any nonprofits that are out there, the key starting point for us anyway was owning land. If
Yeah.
you own land, that's you're maybe not half the way there, but you're a long way there. Next best is, finding partners that own land, right? Could be legions, it could be churches, it could be other groups that have got access to land. Makes all the difference. I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about sort of the segments of homelessness that you're seeing. So, and I know you've got your dog in the background that's looking for some treats. So don't worry. He's welcome to join in if he's got thoughts. In terms of what you're seeing in the sort of segments of homelessness, so you talked about the sort of stereotypical person living on the street, doesn't look is pretty disheveled, might be issues with addictions. And then there's a range from there up to people that might be couch surfing in a neighbor, staying with friends over time. Can you talk about those segments and maybe what sort of where the issue of addictions, how prevalent that is in the people that you're working with or what you're seeing?
Yeah, that's a very complex question. There's multiple
You
pieces to
got three
that.
minutes, so you take your
Yeah,
time.
okay. I mean, listen, street homelessness, we learned a lot of it is results from childhood trauma, right? That's not dealt with, right? And we don't have services out there. They don't know even that they're triggered by trauma. So it's repetitive. Maybe they were sexually assaulted when they were younger, and those memories are coming back. And so we have to have trauma-based care. Um, so there's things like that. There's acquired brain injuries that
Yeah.
people had when they're small or whatever. I think 20% of people that are experiencing homelessness have acquired brain injury, many not knowing, right? So there's so many different things. And I remember in 2017, there's a national youth survey done on homelessness, and it was like a large number of youth under the age of 16 said they experienced homelessness due to family breakdown, right? So like families break down all the time. You could be going along and boom, divorce shatters the family, right? I was at I was at an event today and a hockey player spoke, and this guy, he's like, look, I was like, he was drafted by an NHL team. His life looked pretty good. And then it didn't because he had a knee injury, and the doc handed him like a bunch of oxy, right? And he
Wow.
said it, right? So how many people, he's like, his doctor, I'm just a dumb hockey player. His words, not mine. He's like, well, who am I to, and all of us were like, oh, it's a doctor. Like, that's a professional telling me, like, why, who am I to ask or, question? And he said, of course, like that led to, and then Oxy took over. And his life was in tatters. And
Wow.
he was on the streets of East Side Vancouver, right? And that puts the face to homelessness that really, listen, like when people think it happens to other people, it can happen to you. Yes, addiction too. I was talking to motivational speaker Guy Felicella, who he's an incredible guy. I mean, he died 6 times and was brought back. He
Wow.
said, what he says, people think, oh, you die. It's not after school special. Like he said, and part of the trouble is, well, yeah, we like our staff will do naloxone with people, and you think they're like, oh, man, you saved my life. It's not like that when you're dealing with addiction. Sometimes it's you ruined my high, or I wanted to die, or
Right.
like what the hell did you do at the time? Because the drug's speaking, not that person anymore, right? Right. So what Guy told me too is like, look, we have all these pieces working separately. So you have treatment, and I get out of treatment, I'm like, awesome. Now I'm homeless. And so I go back to using, and then I go back to treatment, and then I go back to homeless. Like, unless you use housing and treatment together, as they've done recently, I think with 90 Done or 91 Dunn Street, the social medicine program, they've just that UHN, Fred Victor, and United Way have put out, right? Like, I think it's 50 beds and it's treatment and housing together and is brilliant, right? But why is it taking this long with
Yeah.
doctors involved every day? Right. So it's the overlap of all those things. And think about it this way too. When we take adults, when I was with 360 Kids, and we would take adults and we put them on the street in the winter, just one night, right? And overnight, they would be and say, "All right, you got to survive. Well, here's a bus ticket, $2." They would be a mess because they didn't sleep, right? And so you think about when you're deprived of sleep for days after days after days, you might actually self-medicate because you're like, I can't take
Yeah.
this. The only thing, and this is what the hockey player that was speaking today was talking about too, is that he was saying that it's the only thing that made him feel good, right? So he chased that high. And so that's the only way of getting by. It's like when kids sleep in class and a teacher calls them out and shames them. That kid might have been walking around all night because it's scary at the dead of night. So they sleep in class when they're safe, right? So there's all these things that kind of overlap and make it tougher. And people have mentioned before too that listen, it's not just a housing piece; it's an income piece too, Brad. As you know, so the incomes now, or we have less housing now across Canada than we did in 2015, right? Affordable housing,
Right.
and we have our in I think it was 1995 when Mike Harris clawed back so welfare or
Yeah.
yeah, right. Ontario Works clawed it back and it's never recovered to what it was. And that's so imagine living on a 1995 wage in 2024, right? And this is what people are dealing with. So they're so far behind. Imagine receiving a $400 housing allowance when housing costs minimum
Yeah.
$2,000. Like the gap is massive. So we need, some income pieces to be in there. We need people to be hired at a living wage. Even you and I are partly responsible too, because, with our teams we're asking people to live in a city or places where they can afford to live where they work because that living wage is so low and support people not making a living wage, right? So we've got to get better as a sector at pushing harder to get those living wages up so we're not part of the problem.
Yeah, you were gracious enough to host myself and a few colleagues on your podcast that I'd highly recommend called On the Way Home, available everywhere. Really informative stuff. I find myself going to that when I'm curious about something. So well done there. But we talked about the issue of developmental disability, intellectual gap, and housing or homelessness. And we were involved in we've learned about this at Community Living Toronto in the last 10 or 15 years through a project that we did with the city of Toronto, where we were fortunate enough to be able to do some research on this. We found that people with intellectual disabilities are overrepresented in the shelter system, and it was between 18 and sort of close to 30% of people in shelters had a diagnosed or often undiagnosed intellectual disability. And the impact was that, again, because they might be eligible for ODSP, they can get a higher amount than they would otherwise on OW.
I mean,
But very easily victimized. So people tended to, get established somewhere else, set up with housing. There isn't appropriate case management or case support, and people end up making bad choices or being coerced back in. So it was the chronic nature of things that were really challenging.
yeah, well, I mean, you just mentioned something there, right? It's not just about housing, folks. It's about housing with the right supports, and those supports look different for different populations, right? For youth, for people with physical disabilities, with people with intellectual disabilities, their supports have to be wrapped around them. It's also about, the name of your organization is community living, right? So it's not just about living, it's about building communities where people can thrive. And we've made those mistakes for years in our sector where we're like, all right, Brad, I found a place for you. You don't know the community, but like basically it's all I got. And we're going to put you in it. Now I'm going to pull you from this shelter where you've made friends and you've built community and people actually care about you. Now you're going to be alone in this place where you don't know one and have no
Yeah,
contacts. And they sabotage that. That doesn't work. We're like, why is Brad back at the shelter 2 months later? Because Brad's itching for love and community and family that he
yeah,
found in shelter. So we have to get better at creating that with the supports that we do with housing, regardless of the sector we're serving. But yeah, I mean, when you have some needs, not only are you looking for housing, but there's some specific supports you need that might cost as well, right?
right.
It just adds to that, and that 20, 30% that you're talking about, it makes it that much more challenging to find dignified, suitable housing.
Yeah. The so because it's so prevalent, it's becoming a political issue as well. And we're seeing some, there's been various approaches. Vancouver had tried sort of a more legalized approach, and they'd backed away from that. Toronto had looked at that, and I don't think that they're going to go down that road. Um, there's in my mind, and maybe you can talk about your experience with how much of homelessness in that is related to a person's motivation. Our premier recently said that people should get off their butts and get to work, right? And he talked about if you have a disability, we'll take care of you. And if you have a mental health issue, we'll support you until you're back on your feet. But the implication there that there's a motivation issue that people aren't sort of thriving. The other proposal that's come forward is this sort of forced treatment for people that are incarcerated or that are young people. Have any experience with that, or what your thoughts are on what might work? Because personally, I can see where it's coming from. People can be afraid to go out on the street. I live in a small town in Milton, outside of Toronto, and we've had homeless people sleeping on the benches in the parks, sleeping on streets, and we did not see that even a couple of years ago. So people are starting to get concerned, and I can see where the motivation is to do some drastic action. But you want to do stuff that's going to work. What are your thoughts?
Well, listen, it's complex. I love, and I'm not going to try and quote it word for word, but uh, in general, the Martin Luther King quote around bootstraps, right? Like, it's hard for a man to pull themselves up by their bootstraps when they can't afford boots, right? And that's really, someone who is living that rough in a tent in an encampment without a fixed address to go to work, to shower, to go to an interview, to get a phone call, to all those things.
Go to the washroom,
Go to the like
right?
wash it, like anything. So to say you are ready for employment, get off your that AF our premier said, I think is really short-sighted, right? And lumping everyone into a category and people like, well, it's their choice. When we talk about choice, we have to actually, what is choice, right? So if I come to you and say your only choice is to go back to a men's shelter where you might have been hurt, or there's some trauma related to it, or you're not good around other people, that's not really choice. That's a
No.
choice, right? And so, well, they chose to stay in the camp, and yeah, they chose safety and community that they created. So you have to have choices for them that actually give them a choice that might be a right fit, right, for people experiencing homelessness and encampments, right? And I think, many have got it right where, look, if there's a bigger encampment, just the necessities of clean washrooms, place to wash your hand, get drinking water. Well, you're encouraging it. You're not really, right? Like we're talking bare. We're
Yeah.
talking living, not
It's
dying,
it's
right?
it's humanity. We're we're
Yeah,
we're responding to people in the moment with their immediate needs.
yeah. And so I always think that, and it bugs me because I think sometimes we're good with good enough. And they say that we're like, hey, let's design a better tent, a better sleeping bag. I know we got these small, and I get what people are saying. It's better than dying, but
Yeah,
we can get better than dying, right? Like that whole uh, when they say perfect is the enemy of good. And I loved it in the movie Blackberry where the guy said, yeah, well, good enough's the enemy of humanity. And I love that quote because it is, because we're like, oh, job done. And we don't try anymore. But I run a program out of the cold. It's a beautiful program. The faith community steps up. We save
right.
thousands of lives. They show people that they're loved and they mean something. But that's not good enough. A mat on the floor and care and a warm meal, and they have to leave at 7 a.m. That's not where it should end. That's a starting point to get them a key to the front door to dignified housing, right? We
Yeah,
can't stop with good enough, a better tent, problem solved. It is a various bunch of housing income supports. And then you mentioned the treatment piece around it's a tough piece around forced treatment, right? And I don't have the data to support it, but this is what I do know from friends or people that I've worked with that are dealing with addiction is that until you really want to do something about it, treatment is very difficult. It may not stick. And everyone's bottom is very different. Sometimes they hit bottom with death, which is, so tragic. But I had a friend, I remember his wife would say, we have to do intervention. We have to do intervention. I'm like, no, so-and-so knows they've got to stop. They don't want to right now. They're not at that point. And when they did, they did. and thankfully got help and now has been, clean for years and years, right? But every day is a fight. So I think we're such a society, Brad, of it's got to be this way or this way. An example of
Yeah.
that is around the safe injection sites, like treatment, not that. Like, well, what can't you do both? Like, we need both, right? There's people, and so many people that are in recovery that will say, without those safe recovery sites, I'd be dead. Like it saves lives. The data shows it. So, and I get that, maybe they shouldn't be in places that are that close to a school or it scares people. But I heard someone the other day who said, without it, basically, here's what's going to happen. They're going to go into the communities and use in spaces you don't want them because they
Yeah.
can't come to one site where they safely can do that. Right. So I think it's not either or which one's better. It's got to be a combo of both, right? Different things work for different people. Uh, I'm not sure where I land on forced treatment. I don't think. Um, it is the path forward because I just don't think if someone doesn't have that will to move and everyone's
Yeah,
at different
it's
stages,
it's
it may not stick.
I'd agree with that. Very hard to force people to do something, even if they may know that it's right for them. People have got to choose to do it. It's a hard journey. You've got to be motivated to do it. So see where that goes. But it's a challenge. You mentioned sort of the shelter system and how it can be uh, unsafe. It can be both things, right? You can have a community there and you can belong and you can have a group of friends and you want to stick close, but otherwise, other times they can be quite dangerous, right? We supported a fella once who talked about going in for a shower, left his clothes outside, sort of like the shower room and all that, came out from the shower, all his clothes and belongings were gone. So he's naked in a strange place, trying to find, and all his stuff that he's got is gone, right? So it's a difficult challenge for
Yeah.
sure.
People, I remember, so I did a bit of a night out where I was doing, so I stayed in one of our out of the cold,
Yeah.
faith-based, and no one knew. And they had the space, so I wasn't taking the space from anyone. But I just wanted to, and so I'm on a mat in the ground, the TV's blasting. I'm like, how could these guys sleep with this movie? Like, and one of the workers said to me, he didn't say, "Hey, dummy," but he should have. He said, when you are sleeping on the street in freezing cold temperatures and the worst of the worst, you can sleep standing up, you can sleep, on a stairwell, you can sleep anywhere when you feel safe. And they
Right.
felt safe, which was cool. But they also, Brad, slept with their shoes on because
Yeah.
people take your shoes. And and again, it's not bad people. Listen, if you're desperate,
Yeah.
if you don't have you don't know what it feels to, especially, sometimes with addiction, you're not dealing with that person anymore. You're not dealing with a rational, logical. You're dealing with an addiction that tells them, I need that next hit or I'm going to die. And you do anything you need to make that happen sometimes, right? So, emergency shelter workers across our country are incredible. They're lifesavers.
Yeah.
They do all they can. But when people have some people have severe mental health or addictions challenges or diagnosed different challenges, yeah, they can react and be violent at times. I like to think that it is more the one-offs than every day. But if you've had that, and even things that trigger trauma, right? Like I remember a trauma specialist saying, I had a beard at the time. He's like, look, some people, their abuser had a beard. So walking into a shelter and seeing you, it's trigger. I'm not going to stay there. Like it's little things like that.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
not
That's
many
a
of us
good.
do the trauma, informed counseling.
Yeah. One of the you talked about how important shelter workers are across the province. And in the province of Ontario, we've got a program called Adult Protective Services, and it's for again adults with an intellectual disability who are often living on their own and can self-direct what they want. So just a shout out, they're
Amazing.
celebrating 50 years this year of that program across the province. And the stories are remarkable, and the staff, the dedication that they bring to the job every day is just incredible.
Yeah,
Um,
it's incredible.
yeah. Just got a couple more minutes here. I find it overwhelming, the magnitude of the challenge. And you're doing a bunch of stuff and we're doing a bunch of stuff, and but it just seems like drips in the ocean at times. What what brings you hope? What keeps you going? What do we have to be optimistic about?
Well, I think talking to people like you gives me hope. Talking to my team, hearing about, even the people themselves. I was talking to a guy about 3 weeks ago, and we had a staff thing in a park, and a guy came up to me, and him and his wife. I don't even know. I offered him, I said, some water. He's like, "Oh, thanks, man. I didn't know he was experiencing homelessness." He started telling me a story. He's like, "Yeah, your team's working with me. My wife and I have been living in our car for 4 years. 4 years, man,
Wow.
living in a car." Now, here's the thing. What I say gives me hope. Wasn't complaining. It's like your team's awesome. Times are tough. At least we have a place to stay. I'm like, he's not bitter. He's not angry. Things are going to change. He said, I can feel it. Like we're going to get a place soon. He hasn't given up hopes. Things like that give me hope. We have to start, very often in society, it's that show me the money. It's show me the proof of concept that this can be done and how you not only save lives, but save dollars. Housing people helps the economy. There's all the data to prove it. When
Yeah,
someone's
yeah, yeah.
housed and not in the hospital and not in shelters are expensive and incarcerated, housing is the most affordable way to help people, and it's the most human way. It's a human right to help people, right? So there's people like yourselves and others who refuse to just say, oh well, this can't be done. You're being innovative and doing vertical communities and our podcast. That's what we do. We that is hopeful. It's a hopeful podcast saying these are huge challenges. Here's all these brilliant people around the world that are rising to this,
Yeah.
and it shows that we can do this and we will. It just takes political will and it takes community to care and say it's up to me, like you have, right?
Yeah. That's really uh really you've given me some optimism there. I know one of the pieces around, maybe we can just end on sort of things that each person can do individually, like we're talking about ourselves as members of organizations and that, but we all encounter homelessness and people that are vulnerable on a regular basis. What advice do you have? I'll start with you. What advice do you have for people just in their daily stuff? Do you give money? Do you not give money? Do you share, like, do you talk? Do you not? How do you, what do you have a rule of thumb that you go by?
Yeah, it's funny hearing this guy talk today, this hockey player. He said, "Man, I just wanted, like when I was on the street, it was like I didn't exist. People walked by like I wasn't even there, like I was the curb, right?" And so it's just be
I was the
kind,
curb. That's the statement, eh?
like,
Yeah.
well, I mean, it's like just be kind, just acknowledge, even a look and a nod that I see you, right? Like that. Um, Money is very personal. I mean, stop trying to quantify, like, if I give so and so money, what are they going to do? And he said it brilliantly today, what I love. He's like, look, you're either going to give me money to buy, if I buy drugs with it. If I don't get it from you, I'm just going to break into the car next to me to do it. So maybe you're preventing the crime, but really, give without thought, give with intention of, I don't like, it's not up to me what they're going to do with it, right? But I gave because from my heart, I wanted to help,
Yeah.
right? You're not hurting, or not. But Brad, I was recently in Toronto, and there was some face down on the sidewalk on on Church Street, and it was just like people going around and not even like, what is wrong with us? Like
Yeah.
that we
Yeah.
can't even, you don't even know if that person's alive. And a few people would kind of look, whatever, and my wife and I being in the sector called 311, got them the help. But also you got to be careful because the man ran up, kind of grabbed him by the shoulder. I'm like, no, right? Like you don't know what state. And of course, the person was startled. No one took a swing at the I'm like, and I talked to him after, like, love your intention, but be very careful. And if you can see someone's agitated or they may not be in the right headspace, maybe not engage in a conversation, but again, acknowledgement and kind of weigh the situation,
Yeah.
right? But start with being kind. And the other piece too is that every one of us has that over the age of 18 has the right to vote, man. Exercise that. Voter turnout
Yeah.
is terrible. Make housing a priority. Make people living with disabilities a priority to get greater income, right? And fight for that. I mean, you have that voice, and we've seen housing become a major theme in all levels of government right now, but we have to continue to hold government accountable for making it better.
Great advice. Nice way to end. Michael, thanks for taking some time today to share your thoughts. You guys do great work at Blue Door. I'm really inspired by the work that you do personally and that your organization does. Your coordinates, where can people find you or follow you on social media and that? What would you suggest?
If you want to find out more about Blue Door, just go to bluedoor.ca. Blue Door is all over social media. Myself, I'm all over social media. Look for me on LinkedIn. Love to connect. And if I can help you in any way connect to others, love to be that. If you have an idea or you're doing some good work and you want others to know, or you need some help, come on the podcast, onthewayhome.ca. And lastly, just say, Brad, thank you to you and your team for all you're doing, for refusing just to say it's up to someone else and taking that on. It's incredible. And we're so grateful for all the work you and your team do.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time. If it's going to be, it's up to me. What a great way to view the challenges we are facing in our city and in our country. I've taken a lot of inspiration from Michael and was very appreciative that he took the time to talk with us today. Michael is very present on social media, and I encourage you to follow him on the different platforms that he's on. I'd also encourage you to listen to his podcast, On the Way Home, which is available on all the sort of popular sites that you get your podcasts on. Thank you for joining our Community Chats podcast. We release a new edition on the 15th and the 30th of each month, so please subscribe to keep up to date. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.
Don't forget to join us next time as we unpack the power of community through collaborative initiatives and shared experiences. Available on Buzzsprout, Spotify, Audible, and YouTube. Follow us on social media at CL Toronto. Let's chat, share, and spread those good vibes together. We hope these discussions will inspire you and give new ideas to add your voice to our mission of making our communities and neighborhoods inclusive and welcoming.